Shane, what do you think was the highest selling console by units in June?
PlayStation 4?
No.
3DS?
No.
Switch?
No.
Xbox One?
No.
Atari VCS?
It was the NES Classic.
Hot take! Well, folks, it's true. The NES Classic is actually the top-selling video game console for last month.
Yeah, so we had heard some numbers about how well Nintendo was doing, but now it's official, right?
Yeah.
It's not monetarily because of how little the NES Classic costs compared to its competitors. PlayStation 4 actually did sell the most, or make the most money off of their consoles per se, but the NES Classic, because it's $60 and because everyone wanted one of those things and couldn't find it for the longest time, it sold the most in June.
Yeah, and you know what? It probably made them quite a bit of money too, because the NES Classic, it really can't be that expensive to produce when you consider on a massive scale of production lines and how few components are actually in the machine. It definitely has to be a pretty profitable item, and it's crazy to see it selling this much. Well, I mean, it's not crazy to see it selling this much. It's crazy for it to be considered the best-selling console of this recent month. Because, I mean, like, that typically doesn't happen.
You don't consider that, right? So I got a quote that I want to read to you, all right?
Okay.
This is from an analyst, Matt Piscatella, said, "This is the first time a Nintendo Entertainment System console has led in monthly unit sales since NPD tracking began in 1995.
Wow. Okay.
Because the Nintendo Entertainment System was around in 1995. It wasn't officially discontinued until August of 1995. So I think Nintendo was still repairing them and things like that.
So basically what this means is Nintendo has never led at the very top until just last month?
No, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Ah, I see. So basically what they're saying is that, that's kind of, I mean, it's not the exact same system, though, right?
Well, no, I guess technically not, but it does have that branding on it. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay, here's an interesting aspect about this. Now, we've seen that the NES Classic has been successful, the SNES Classic has been successful, but what if they had introduced some concept to download games onto it, or even have like a little miniature carts that are based off NFC where you just put it near the system or something, then it registers it and you get to play it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a cool idea. And so I do have kind of a question about that. So do you think, because of how well this is selling, do you think there could be some sort of added accessory? Or do you think there could be another unit like it? Could there be an NES Classic 2?
I think...
I'm kind of like, but the games...
Hear me out on this.
I'm a little like... Yeah.
Spitball a crazy idea.
All right.
Now, I don't know. We've seen accessories for the NES Classic and the SNES Classic being released by third-party companies and Nintendo themselves, just new kinds of controllers and things like that, even carrying cases and whatever. So those things are normal. But what I'm seeing here is that people want to pay for a cheaper console that has very basic game ideas that are fun and well-designed. Why not make a system that is basically just that? Why not make a brand new system with simplified mechanics and simplified ideas that has the ability to just play older style video games that are designed today? Imagine the development costs on these games would be significantly reduced because they don't have to worry about gigantic sound systems and like HD graphics and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
They could make games that are around the size of, and let's just say you give them some space, 50 megabytes or something like that, so they can actually just make new games utilizing older mechanics. And I know back in the day to make some of these games would actually take quite a long time because they'd have to be producing them for a while, and at the time there was a lot of restrictions on the technology that existed, but now people are capable of making these full-on experiences by themselves, where in the past it typically wasn't the case.
And we got to take into consideration also, back then, the teams working on these games were much smaller. Like, oftentimes it was just like two schmoes, like, making a game, or a group of like 10 people or something. If Nintendo did that, that would be pretty interesting, because we could expect the same sort of quality that we would get from a Nintendo product, and it could be in that 8-bit format. I automatically default to like Shovel Knight, because that, in my opinion, is one of the best 8-bit that's not 8-bit games to come out in a very long time.
Yeah.
So if it was content of that pedigree, then I'd be very happy.
You know, maybe I'm thinking about this too much a little bit, because I mean, the idea of that happening is insane, right? Like, they would never do that. Not even Nintendo's insane, they'll do whatever they want. This is something that they simply couldn't do because, one, it would be kind of eating into what they're doing right now.
It'd be competing. But in a way, it also wouldn't. Because the Switch is an on-the-go console as well as a home console. Maybe this could be the home console now. Maybe it's like, okay, no, the Switch is taking over for the 3DS, and the real Wii U, the real at-home experience was this all along.
Maybe.
I don't know. Maybe it's a crazy idea.
What's in the Switch right now is not the most expensive hardware in the world, internally at least, when it comes to the screen, when it comes to the battery, when it comes to all those other mechanics in there that have to make it work for portable. That's what adds a lot of the cost to the Switch. If Nintendo were to make a simplified version of the Switch that was home-based and had like left and right Joy-Con controllers that came out separately and all that stuff, they could actually heavily reduce the impact and cost of the Switch and sell it for a reduced price and undercut like the Xbox One, whatever their next version will be, and the PlayStation, right?
People have been talking about that. But we're talking specifically about the NES Classic.
The reason I'm bringing this up is because it's showing that consumers out there are enjoying that classic and retro experience, right? So what we're looking at right now are these other systems coming out in the horizon that are focusing on the 4K content and like bigger, grander experiences. And Nintendo themselves right now, they're in a position where they don't have the power to kind of compete with those systems. So if they were to really like go all in and make a simplified version of the Switch, they could have that same idea that you're seeing so prevalent here with the Switch at home.
Yeah, okay, but the Switch...
Like the PlayStation TV.
Right, but the Switch was sold as a unit that you could take with you, right? So there's that expectation there. And what the NES Classic is something that's so different. It's not new games. A big reason why people are picking this up is because it's a bit of that nostalgia, right? This is completely nostalgia fueled.
Okay, so how about this? People are paying how much for an NES Classic right now?
In the US, it's $60.
Okay, and how much are people paying for the SNES Classic?
The SNES, it's slightly more.
Yes, and it's slightly more because it actually comes with a secondary controller and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But let's take this into consideration, okay? If they were to be able to take the NES or the Nintendo Switch, knock down the price to, let's say, about $150, maybe $200, okay? And it's a non-portable version, right? So they can make it a lot cheaper. Let's say they do this. There's no extra dock. There's none of that stuff. It's just a Switch that sits at home. And they bundled the NES Classic and SNES Classics games together, plus Nintendo 64 games. Suddenly, you got yourself a brand new video game system that plays all the classic retro video games, and hey, make it look like a miniature N64 or something like that. Maybe make variations of the system that look like different things, and suddenly you got yourself a brand new console that can play modern games that are being released right now, and the classic games from the past that Nintendo's been capitalizing on.
The Switch Classic Edition.
That's what I'm saying.
Huh.
Right?
I don't know. That's a cool idea. There's a lot of like ifs and buts there.
But they got
to get to that point.
100%, right? But they have to capitalize on what they're doing with the NES Classic right now, right? They can't let this up. They just sold an NES for bundled with a bunch of games that very few people seem to care all that much about. I mean, I care about them, but that means that there's people out there that are not hardcore gamers like us that are actually buying this system. That's insane.
Well, the nostalgia is a very powerful tool, right? So if we don't wind up seeing something like a Switch Classic console, like we've already made videos about the Game Boy Classic and the N64 Classic. Do you feel like there's any room somewhere in there for like another edition of one of these boxes that's already out there? It'd be very easy for them to take the shell and possibly put different ROMs or different functionality into an NES or an SNES if we're not going to see a Game Boy or an N64 Classic.
Well, to be fair, I believe it would be weird. I think the way that Nintendo would go about this to make the most sense is maybe make a miniaturized arcade cabinet of existing arcade games they have.
Maybe.
Right? Yeah. Because that way you're basically doing that, but you're so close to doing that with the Nintendo Switch already, and they do have arcade games on the Nintendo Switch true. As it is. Yeah. I think that Nintendo's line of arcade games or home consoles only goes so far. The interesting thing to take into consideration, too, is that the NES and the SNES were successes. The Nintendo 64 was less of a success. It still had its impact. People still cared about it. But you're definitely going to see a kind of a decline, especially when you get to the GameCube, because the GameCube simply wasn't as successful as the N64, and the N64 was simply not as successful as the SNES.
Yeah, I think the GameCube is kind of is the cutoff mark if there were classics to be released released right now. I feel like the N64, successful or not, it has more of an attach rate from adults right now. I feel like they're just in the sweet spot of adults where like they got a lot of exposable cash. Maybe folks are in like their 20s or so. Like, so yeah, I feel like that'd be great. But like a year later, if a GameCube Classic were to come out, it'd be an audience that like a lot of people would still enjoy it, right? I'd pick one up. But yeah, I'd feel like there may not be as much disposable income from the rose-tinted glasses community.
I have a crazy idea.
What's that?
Okay. Now, Nintendo is good at making these classic systems. Why are they only focusing on Nintendo consoles? Think about this. What if Nintendo were to make a classic system for a competitor system at the time period that they've worked with now? Think about this.
Who could that be, Shane?
TurboGrafx. Oh, you thought I was going to say Sega. Shame on you. See, yes, they could probably work with Sega and make a Sega Genesis or even a Master System variation that could be a classicized version that is officially made from Nintendo and has all the all the factory insides that they've done with this system.
If you want to talk about the N64 not being a success and then you want to make a classic version of the TurboGrafx, well, I mean, hey man,
it's true. It's true.
That's fine.
I'm just saying that the specs in there are so close to what you would get on one of those systems. It'd be easy to replicate.
I would buy any classic system because I'm a shill. I just love video games. So any idea that you bring to the table, bringing back classic systems, like I'll dive into. But I'm mostly interested in kind of wondering about what the next sort of NES Classic iteration could be. So
we've had a lot of conversations about Nintendo working with other companies and kind of coming into that. We even had a video where we talked about Nintendo buying Sega outright. There's those ideas that can float around, but if Nintendo were to expand their concepts of what they're doing right now and work with companies like Sega, just think about that. A Sega Genesis Classic.
Okay, I'm getting behind you right now, right? Okay, the as far as I'm concerned, the best plug and plays that we've had have been of the Nintendo produced variety.
Exactly. Yes.
They're working with Sega already. All right. If they were to come together with Sega and whoever they have making these, constructing these units, the same set quality that we've seen in the classic systems, being put into a Sega Classic system, that would be incredible.
And you know what I think would make it even more interesting too?
What's that?
Okay, how about the concept that once you've beaten or cleared a couple of set games on the Sega Genesis Classic, then you unlock maybe one or two hidden Sega CD games? They've worked with Konami already, okay? We've seen Konami games on the classic systems.
What are you trying to say?
I'm saying they release a classic Genesis system.
Yeah.
They've got enough space digitally to put Snatcher on there.
Snatcher, oh my gosh, Shane.
Right, I'm thinking, like, the Sega CD was one of those systems that kind of fell.
With you, every conversation is a Kevin Bacon game to Snatcher. I swear
But I think it would be a great idea. I honestly think this would be something that would be really interesting to do.
Yeah.
Look, if it gets to that point where we have something like that happen, where Sega or Nintendo is working with these other companies to make these classic versions of the system, obviously they take their cut, all right? But we're seeing other companies attempt to do classic-like systems, and they constantly fall on their faces.
Right. We are going to be seeing another Sega console coming out, and a lot of people are a little iffy about the construction of that one
Exactly,
as well.
right? I'm saying basically keep those designs and those elements within Japan and within like that company and let them work on that. Use the same interface, use the same idea, the same philosophy, and work with Sega and do it. I think it would be really fun. I think it would be really interesting, and I'm pretty sure a lot of gamers out there would like it. And I don't think it would tarnish the Nintendo brand.
Yeah, when you say that, that's where I kind of jump in and say, like, they don't seem to enjoy celebrating other companies as much. So
with
I don't think this will ever happen.
With Super Smash Brothers, Sonic came on board. We saw
Sonic coming to Super Smash felt like a we win moment for Nintendo, though. It felt less like, oh, hey, check out Sega's old library. It was more like, we beat him into the ground. He's here now. He's with us in the Olympics. I don't know.
Sure.
But I think they're fantastic ideas. This episode has turned into such a weird sort of talk about what could possibly bubble up from this.
Well, basically what we're saying here, folks, is that there is a success here. There is a clear success, one that I think investors are going to be hounding Nintendo to replicate, and they can only replicate it so many times. So I think venturing outside, and I mean, obviously we both would want the N64 before we would want any other kind of system being classicized.
Or the Game Boy. I dig the Game Boy too.
Yeah, right? But I really feel that if Nintendo were to work on those aspects, I think they themselves could internally produce something that would basically be a cool add-on. I think celebrating the generations of classic video game systems that were at the same time released around the same time that the NES and the Sega Genesis, or sorry, the Super Nintendo were, would be kind of an interesting way to celebrate the entire lineup. See, think about it this way. When we're talking about Nintendo classic systems, imagine if the Nintendo classic idea was the industry, right? Their entire concept of Nintendo being a part of that industry could control that industry at the same time. That would be powerful marketing that Nintendo could hold, and I don't think anyone else has the capabilities to do it. But what do you think? Do you think that this is an insanely crazy idea?
Shane will be producing the TurboGrafx Classic on store shelves in about 5 to 6 months or so.
Yeah, TurboGrafx is a bit of a long shot, but I definitely could see a Sega Genesis with, a couple 32X games and some Sega CD games. But what do you think, folks? Do you think this is a good idea?
Do you like weird conversations? 'Cause this is a heck of one.
Let us know.